On a freezing night in the Colorado mountains, a lonely veteran was driving home when his headlights caught something lying on the side of the road. A wounded German shepherd, half buried in snow, still breathing. He stopped, and that single decision changed everything. What he didn't know was that this dog wasn't lost. He was sent to lead him into a secret no one was meant to find, and to remind him that miracles still walk among us, sometimes on four legs. Stay until the end of this story. It's one of courage, faith, and the kind of loyalty that only heaven could inspire. If you believe kindness still matters, please subscribe, share this story, and help us bring more hope into the world. Thank you for watching. May God bless you and everyone you love. The wind that swept across the Colorado mountains that afternoon carried the taste of ice and pine resin, biting through the air like a blade. Snow clouds had gathered low over the valley, wrapping the small mining town of Silver Creek in a silent haze. The two-lane road that wound out of town toward the high ridge was deserted, except for an old pickup truck climbing slowly through the drifts. Behind the wheel sat Jack Turner, a man who looked like he had been carved from the same rock that lined these mountains. Broad shoulders, weather-worn face, a faint scar tracing from his temple to his jaw. At 42, Jack still moved with the quiet precision of a Marine, even though it had been 10 years since he'd left the Corps. His short brown hair was peppered with gray, his beard trimmed but rough at the edges. The years of service had left their mark, steady hands, wary eyes, and a silence that often said more than words. Since returning from Afghanistan, he had chosen solitude over conversation, a cabin over the noise of cities, the company of wind and trees over that of men. That afternoon, he had been out tracking deer prints in the fresh snow, not to hunt, but to clear his mind. The mountains had a way of keeping secrets, and so did he. The memories of gunfire and sandstorms still flickered in his dreams, chasing him even here, among the pines. The heater in the truck rattled as he turned the corner toward home, and that was when he saw it. Something dark lying in the snow near the ditch. At first he thought it was a fallen branch, but then it moved, just barely. Jack slowed, headlights cutting through the swirling flakes, and his heart clenched. It was a German shepherd, large and strong even in collapse, its coat a blend of sable and black now matted with mud and blood. The animal's ribs lifted shallowly with each breath, and a torn strap of what looked like a training harness hung from its neck. Jack pulled over, killed the engine, and stepped into the storm. The cold bit instantly at his face, but he ignored it. "Easy, boy," he said quietly, crouching beside the animal. The dog's amber eyes flicked open, fierce and alert even through pain. There was no fear there, only the instinctive calculation of a trained working dog. Jack recognized that look. He'd seen it in the eyes of soldiers who refused to quit. Blood darkened the snow beneath the shepherd's side, and the paw was twisted awkwardly. He slid his hands under the dog's chest, surprised by the weight, close to 80 pounds, but he lifted it gently and carried it to the truck. The animal whimpered once, a low sound of exhaustion, then went still. The drive back to the cabin felt longer than usual. The tires crunched over ice while Jack kept one eye on the road and one on the passenger seat where the dog lay wrapped in his coat. Snow thickened, blurring the world into shades of gray. By the time he reached the small clearing where his cabin stood, dusk had fallen. The cabin was modest, a single-story wooden structure built by his father decades ago. Smoke curled weakly from the chimney, and a stack of chopped wood leaned under the eaves. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the smell of cedar and coffee. Jack laid the dog on a wool blanket near the hearth, the firelight flickering over its body. He went to work with the calm focus that came from years of field medicine. His first aid kit was a battered military pouch, still marked UMC. He cleaned the wounds carefully with warm water, discovering a deep gash along the hind leg, likely from barbed wire or a trap, and bruises along the ribs. The collar was military-grade nylon, the kind used for K9 units, with a broken ID tag hanging loose. The engraved letters were almost unreadable under the blood, but he caught the faint outline of a name. R.E. before it was scratched away. "So you're a soldier too," Jack murmured. The dog's breathing steadied as Jack stitched the wound, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. He talked to it softly, not expecting a response but needing to fill the silence. "You've seen things, haven't you?" "So have I." The shepherd's ears twitched slightly, as if it understood. When Jack finished, he poured a little water into a bowl and slid it close. The dog licked weakly, then laid its head back down. Jack sat back on the floor, leaning against the wall. Firelight danced across his face, revealing the tired lines around his eyes. He studied the animal. Broad chest, strong legs, even an injury. Not a stray, not some lost pet. This dog had purpose written in every muscle. Its gaze, half open now, was sharp but wary, as if still on duty. Jack felt a pang in his chest he hadn't known in years, a mix of protectiveness and recognition. He saw in that animal the same broken discipline he carried himself. He brewed coffee on the stove, the bitter aroma filling the room. Outside, wind howled against the shutters, and the snow piled higher. Somewhere beyond those woods lay miles of frozen wilderness, and yet fate had placed this wounded creature at his door. Jack couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't coincidence. When he returned to the hearth, the shepherd's breathing had evened out. The fire cast a soft amber glow across its fur, bringing out the rich tones of its coat. Jack crouched beside it again and brushed his hand gently over its head. "You need a name," he said quietly. "Can't keep calling you dog." He paused, watching the firelight reflect in those half-open amber eyes. "Rex," he decided. "Strong name. Fits you." For a brief moment, the shepherd's tail moved, just once, but it was enough. Jack smiled faintly, the first real smile in months. He added another log to the fire, then pulled an old wool blanket over the animal. Outside, the storm raged harder, snow slanting against the windows like shards of glass. The wind groaned through the pine trees, but inside the cabin, warmth slowly pushed back the cold. Jack poured himself another cup of coffee and sat in his armchair, eyes drifting toward the sleeping dog. He wondered who had trained Rex, where he'd come from, and what kind of fight had left him bleeding in the snow. The thought lingered as the fire popped and crackled. By midnight, the storm had thickened into a white curtain. Jack dozed off in the chair, his mind slipping between dreams of sand and snow, gunfire and silence. In one dream, he saw himself running through a battlefield again, the sound of barking in the distance. He turned and saw Rex leaping through smoke toward him. He woke with a start, heart pounding. For a moment, he wasn't sure if it was the dream or something outside that woke him. Then he heard it, a low, steady rumble, not from the storm, but from the dog. Rex was awake now, head lifted, ears forward, eyes fixed on the door. The growl was deep, warning, not pain. Jack set his cup down slowly. "Easy," he whispered. But the shepherd didn't relax. Instead, it let out a single sharp bark and stared harder toward the window. Jack frowned, listening. Beyond the wind, there was something else. A faint mechanical hum, distant but distinct, like an engine idling somewhere in the dark. He stood, crossed to the window, and peered out. The snow made it hard to see, but he thought he caught a flicker of light between the trees. Headlights, maybe, disappearing down the lower road. Whoever they were, they had no reason to be up here in this weather. He looked back at Rex, who hadn't taken his eyes off the door. The dog's body was tense, ready despite its injuries. Jack exhaled slowly. "You've got instincts," he said softly, "and I've learned to trust instincts." He stirred the fire again, feeding it until the flames roared high. The warmth filled the small cabin, chasing away the cold shadows. Rex settled slightly, though his gaze stayed fixed on the window. Jack returned to his chair, watching the dog until his eyelids grew heavy once more. Outside, the snow kept falling, erasing tracks, swallowing sound. Inside, two survivors, one man and one wounded dog, shared the fragile peace of a winter night, unaware that this chance encounter was the first step toward uncovering something far darker, hidden deep in the Colorado wilderness. The night over the Colorado highlands had turned cruel. The storm that had battered the valley all day now eased into a sharp, cutting wind that whispered through the pines and scraped against the cabin walls like fingernails. The world outside had become a frozen void, white dunes of snow under a sky of steel, where even moonlight seemed reluctant to linger. In the distance, the faint howl of coyotes drifted down from the ridge, carried by the wind and lost again in the endless dark. Inside the small cabin, the fire had burned low, and Jack Turner, the solitary ex-Marine, slept in his armchair with his boots still on, the weight of exhaustion pressing down like armor. His rugged face, lined with years of dust, war, and regret, softened in sleep, though his hands, calloused and scarred, remained unconsciously curled, as if still gripping a rifle. The years had never truly released him. Even now, in peace, he slept like a man who expected the sound of gunfire. Across the room, Rex, the wounded German shepherd, stirred from the thick blanket near the hearth. The firelight painted his sable coat in flickers of gold and shadow, catching the faint silver scars that crossed his flank. His ears twitched, head lifting sharply, amber eyes flaring awake. Something outside had stirred the instincts buried deep within him, the same instincts forged through years of training. Rex was no ordinary dog. He had once been part of a ranger's K9 unit, disciplined, brave, and loyal to the bone. Even now, injured and weak, his gaze held the sharp, assessing intelligence of a soldier. He rose unsteadily, his bandaged hind leg trembling slightly, and moved to the window. Then, with sudden urgency, he barked, a sharp, commanding sound that broke through the cabin's silence like a warning shot. Jack's eyes snapped open instantly. The old habits of a soldier die hard. He didn't startle or flinch. Instead, he froze, listening. The air inside the cabin was still except for Rex's growl, a deep, rolling sound vibrating from his chest. Jack leaned forward, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and murmured, "Easy, boy." But the shepherd didn't relax. His tail stiffened, his gaze fixed on the black window pane as though seeing through it into the endless forest. Then Jack heard it too, a faint, mechanical hum beneath the wind, distant but distinct. He stood and crossed to the window, pushing aside the curtain. Far beyond the clearing, down the slope where the tree line swallowed the road, a single pair of headlights glimmered faintly through the snow. Then came the sound of an engine revving, too heavy, too slow for a car. It was a truck. Jack's breath condensed against the glass. No one had any business driving out here this late. Not in weather like this. The nearest neighbor was 8 miles away, and the ranger station even farther. He turned to Rex, whose growls had deepened into a low, warning rumble. "You're not wrong," Jack muttered. "Something's off." He pulled on his coat, a faded olive parka with torn seams, and reached for the flashlight and his old marine-issue knife. The beam of light flickered weakly as he tested it. "Stay close," he told the dog, though he knew Rex didn't need the order. The animal was already by the door, muscles tense beneath the coarse fur, ready to move. When Jack opened the door, the cold struck them like a wall. Snow whipped sideways across the clearing, biting into their faces. The world had turned ghostly, muted, empty, except for the crunch of boots and the steady pant of the dog beside him. They followed the faint hum down the narrow path that wound toward the lower road. Jack's boots sank deep into the snow, each step deliberate. His flashlight cut thin lines through the dark, glancing off branches heavy with frost. The silence was the kind that makes the ears ring, a silence that hides danger. Rex moved slightly ahead, nose close to the ground, sniffing the air, tail low but steady. After a few hundred yards, they reached the edge of the logging road, a rough, frozen strip carved between the trees. That was where they saw it. Tire tracks, deep and fresh, cutting through the snow like open wounds. Jack crouched, the flashlight trembling faintly in his gloved hand. The impressions were wide, heavy, truck tires, dual axle. He brushed a layer of snow aside with his hand, revealing faint droplets of red underneath. "Blood," he muttered, voice tightening. It wasn't from an animal. He knew that color too well. He glanced at Rex, whose nose was already buried near the edge of the trail, sniffing intently. The dog let out a short whine, then moved further down the road, tugging Jack along. A few yards ahead, something dark fluttered against the snow, half buried by the wind. Jack picked it up, a torn piece of forest green fabric with a patch still clinging to it. He turned it toward the light, squinting to read the emblem. It was a ranger's badge, the stitching frayed but unmistakable. U.S. Forest Service. Jack's stomach tightened. He had met the rangers in passing, young men and women who patrolled the mountains, protecting wildlife and keeping hikers safe. Whoever this belonged to, they hadn't lost it by accident. The engine sound had vanished now, swallowed by distance or perhaps by silence itself. Jack turned slowly, scanning the tree line. "Someone's hurt," he said softly, more to himself than to Rex. The dog's ears perked at the sound of his voice, but didn't look up. His nose was fixed to the ground, tracing something invisible to human senses, a scent trail that led toward the forest. Jack frowned, his pulse quickening. "You want me to follow, don't you?" Rex gave a short bark, urgent and sharp, then took a few steps toward the trees before pausing to glance back at him. It wasn't random behavior. Jack recognized it immediately. The signal of a trained search dog asking his handler to move. Only Rex wasn't his dog, and there was no handler here anymore. Whatever training this animal had, it ran deep, instinctive. Jack hesitated only a second. "All right, lead the way," he said quietly. Together they moved into the dark forest, snow crunching underfoot. The beam from the flashlight wove through the trees, catching the glint of ice and the shadows of broken branches. The deeper they went, the more the world felt swallowed by quiet, as if even the wind had stopped to listen. Jack followed the tire tracks until they disappeared under the trees, but the drops of blood continued faintly, marking a path. Rex stopped suddenly, nose pressed to the snow. Jack crouched beside him, his breath forming clouds. "What do you see?" There was a faint metallic smell in the air, blood mixed with oil. Jack's eyes narrowed as he spotted a crushed piece of plastic wedged against a tree root. He pulled it free, brushing snow away. It was a broken radio, military grade, the kind used by law enforcement and search teams. The label on the back was half melted, but one line was still visible. Property of U.S. Forest Service, Station 17. Jack felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. He'd been through enough ambushes in his life to know what this looked like. A scene of violence quickly covered by snow. He looked at Rex, whose tail had gone rigid, ears forward, every muscle taut. "You were there," Jack said softly, realization dawning. "You were part of whatever happened." The dog looked up at him, eyes shining with something between pain and urgency, then turned again toward the deeper forest, barking once, a call for movement, for help. Jack stood, snow creaking beneath his boots. Somewhere out there, someone was bleeding, maybe dying. Maybe the owner of this patch, this radio. Maybe the person who had trained Rex. He turned his flashlight toward the dark ridge ahead. "All right," he whispered, voice steady now, the old soldier surfacing once more. "Let's go find them." As they moved forward, the forest closed around them, the trees rising like walls on either side. The snow fell thicker, muting the world into silence again. Behind them, the faint imprint of their footsteps and paw prints trailed back toward the cabin, already half buried. Ahead of them, only the whisper of the wind and the steady determination of a wounded dog guided the way. Somewhere beyond that darkness waited the truth of what had brought Rex to Jack's road, and the beginning of something far larger than either man or animal yet understood. The morning broke slow and colorless over the mountains of Colorado. The storm had spent itself in the night, leaving behind a world wrapped in pale silence. The town of Silver Creek, a mining settlement that never quite modernized, still slept under a blanket of white. Smoke curled lazily from chimneys, the smell of pine and burning oak drifting into the crisp air. Far above the valley, Jack Turner's cabin stood on a ridge surrounded by snow-laden pines. The sun struggled to pierce through thin veils of mist, turning the frost on the branches into thousands of glinting shards. Jack stood outside the cabin door, his breath steaming, a steaming mug of coffee in one hand, the other gripping the collar of the restless German shepherd beside him. Rex was no longer the weak, wounded animal Jack had rescued 2 nights before. Though his hind leg still carried a faint limp beneath the fresh bandage, the dog's energy had returned like a flame reignited. His sable and black coat shimmered in the cold light, and his amber eyes were alert, scanning the tree line with the intensity of a soldier returning to the battlefield. Every few seconds, he whined softly and tugged at the leash, as if trying to remind Jack of something he could not put into words. Jack, still groggy from sleep and the memories that haunted it, studied the animal with the mixture of admiration and caution that came naturally to him. He had seen men with that same look, the look of those who had lost something important and would not rest until they found it. Jack himself was a man built from equal parts endurance and weariness. At 42, his tall frame had the solid bearing of someone shaped by discipline. His brown hair, streaked with silver near the temples, was cropped short. His jaw carried a few days of rough stubble, and his gray-blue eyes, though steady, carried the distant weight of wars fought in deserts far from these mountains. The years in the Marine Corps had given him more scars than he cared to count, not all of them visible. Since his return to civilian life, he had chosen solitude, a cabin, a wood stove, and silence, to keep the world at arm's length. Yet since Rex appeared, that quiet had shifted. The dog's instincts had stirred something old in him, the need to act. That morning, Rex wouldn't eat, wouldn't rest. He paced in front of the door until Jack finally gave in. "All right, soldier," he muttered, pulling on his coat and gloves. "Show me what's so damn urgent." He slung a small rucksack over his shoulder. First aid kit, binoculars, knife, and a thermos of coffee, and let the dog lead. The path down the mountain wound through dense forest, the snow crunching under their boots and paws. Shafts of cold sunlight broke through the pines, revealing tracks of elk and fox, the occasional feather caught on a branch. The air smelled of cedar, frozen earth, and something else. Metallic, faint, almost like dried blood. Jack's breath came, out in even clouds, as he followed Rex deeper into the woods. The dog's pace quickened when they reached the lower ridge. He stopped suddenly near a fallen log, sniffed the ground, and began to paw at the snow. Jack crouched beside him and saw it, a glint of metal half buried in ice. He brushed away the snow and pulled free a broken radio transceiver, its casing cracked, wires exposed. The words U.S. Forest Service were printed faintly along the side. Jack turned it over and felt his pulse pick up. This was government issue, ranger equipment. The antenna was bent as if it had been stomped on, and dark stains along the corner told their own story. He reached into his pack and wiped the surface with a rag, revealing part of an etched serial number. "Someone didn't just drop this," he muttered. Rex, ears flat, circled the log and started digging again. Within seconds, his paw hit something softer than snow. Jack knelt to help, uncovering a small rectangle of metal, the kind worn on a uniform. It was a name tag, dull and scratched, but the engraving was still clear enough to read. Sarah Moore. Jack froze. He knew the name. Everyone in Silver Creek did. Sarah Moore was the young park ranger who patrolled the Western Preserve, often alone, with a reputation for being fearless and unyielding. He'd met her twice in town, once at the supply store, once when she'd stopped by his cabin months ago, asking about illegal hunting in the ridge area. He remembered her clearly. Mid-30s, tall and lean with a wiry strength that spoke of long days in the field. Long auburn hair usually tied in a braid under her ranger's cap, and sharp hazel eyes that seemed to read a man before he spoke. Her skin was pale but freckled from the mountain sun, and though her voice was calm, it carried quiet authority. Jack had respected her instantly. She reminded him of the kind of officer soldiers trusted without question. Now, holding her name tag, he felt a cold unease crawl through his chest. Sarah had gone missing 2 weeks earlier during a patrol near the northern boundary of the preserve. The official search had ended after 3 days when the weather turned violent. Everyone assumed she'd fallen victim to the storm or a bear. But this was proof she'd been here. And recently. He turned toward Rex, whose gaze fixed on him with urgency. The dog barked once, then trotted toward a narrow trail leading deeper into the forest, the snow along it disturbed by faint tire grooves. Jack followed, his boots crunching rhythmically as they descended the slope. After another mile, the trail opened into a shallow valley bordered by cliffs. The air was strangely still here, heavy with the smell of oil and smoke. Then Jack saw it. Below, nestled at the base of the ridge, stood a compound hidden among the pines. A faded wooden sign out front read, "Wildlife Research Center." But even from this distance, Through the binoculars he pulled from his pack, Jack could see the lie. The metal fencing, the guard shack, the row of trucks coated in mud. None of it looked like legitimate research. Through the lenses, he caught the flicker of movement inside the enclosure. A caged mountain lion pacing restlessly, its ribs visible through matted fur. Beside it, a bear cub chained to a post, and in another pen, the dark silhouette of an eagle with its wings bound in rope. Jack's jaw tightened. He'd seen this kind of operation before overseas, facilities dressed up as sanctuaries but serving black markets. Poachers, smugglers, and the sort of men who treated life, human or animal, as a commodity. His stomach twisted with anger. He lowered the binoculars and exhaled slowly, forcing calm. "So that's your nest," he murmured. Rex growled low, the sound vibrating through the cold air. The dog's entire body was tense, hackles raised, as if confirming what Jack already knew. He crouched behind a fallen log, studying the place. There were at least 4 trucks parked inside the fence, and 2 men visible, both wearing heavy jackets and rifles slung over their shoulders. One, tall and burly with a gray beard, smoked lazily near the gate. The other, younger and thinner, carried a clipboard and moved between the cages with mechanical detachment. Jack guessed there were more inside. The compound ran on generator power, the low hum carrying faintly up the slope. Rex whined again, pulling Jack's attention to the left side of the compound, where the terrain dropped sharply into a ravine. There, half hidden behind a cluster of trees, was a small wooden shack. Smoke trickled weakly from its chimney. The dog's ears perked and his tail stiffened, his body leaning forward. Jack understood instantly. "Someone's in there," he whispered. His pulse quickened. Could Sarah still be alive? The possibility hit him like a jolt of electricity. He steadied his breathing, letting the Marine in him take control. This wasn't just chance anymore. It was a mission. The snow underfoot shifted as he adjusted his stance, pulling the binoculars back for one last look. The distance was too far to confirm anything, but movement in the shack's window, something small, maybe the flicker of a figure, told him enough to believe. Jack rested a gloved hand on Rex's head. "You brought me here for a reason," he said softly. "And I'm not walking away." The shepherd looked up, eyes burning with fierce recognition, and gave a short, decisive bark that echoed faintly across the valley. Together they crouched behind the ridge, the wind sweeping past them, carrying with it the smell of smoke, iron, and danger. Below them, the supposed research center stirred with activity, unaware that 2 survivors, one man haunted by war and one dog forged by loyalty, had found its trail. And somewhere within that maze of cages and fences, Sarah Moore might still be waiting to be saved. Night fell over the Colorado highlands like a curtain of black glass, and snow drifted down in thick, whispering veils that swallowed the sound of the forest. The storm had returned, heavier than before, and the cold carved through every layer of cloth like invisible knives. From the ridge above the valley, Jack Turner watched the compound below through the haze of snowfall, his breath coiling in slow, deliberate clouds. The glow of the Wildlife Research Center sign flickered under the wind, its paint peeling, its promise false. Beneath it sprawled a labyrinth of cages, fences, and trucks, an empire built on cruelty and silence. Jack adjusted the binoculars, scanning for movement. He had counted 4 guards earlier, all armed, all sluggish but alert enough to be dangerous. Now, 2 patrolled the outer fence while another smoked near the generator shed. The 4th was nowhere to be seen. His instincts prickled at that. Jack, crouched behind a snow-laden boulder, was wrapped in a weather-beaten parka and black scarf pulled up to his cheekbones. His jaw, unshaven for days, carried a rough layer of stubble, the silver threading through his dark beard catching faint reflections from the moonlight. His eyes, steel gray, unwavering, were the kind that had stared through sandstorms, ambushes, and battlefield smoke. Years of war had made him quiet and precise, a man who trusted action more than words. The ghosts of Afghanistan still trailed behind him in dreams, faces of men he'd led and lost. And tonight, in the frozen air, those memories had returned like old comrades whispering orders. He glanced beside him, where Rex, the German shepherd, crouched low in the snow, his breath quick and steady. Rex had changed since the night Jack found him. No longer a wounded stray, but a soldier again, instincts alive, eyes sharp. His sable coat glistened wet under the falling snow, and his ears twitched with every distant sound. The bandage on his leg had been removed, though a faint scar remained where teeth and wire had once cut deep. Despite the cold, the dog's body was taut with energy, muscles coiled beneath thick fur. Jack looked at him and felt that familiar flicker of respect, the kind a soldier gives another. "Ready?" he whispered. Rex gave a low growl, a quiet yes. They moved together down the slope, shadows slipping through snow and pine. Jack's boots made no sound. He had learned long ago how to step like a ghost. The air was so cold it burned his lungs, but he ignored it. At the perimeter fence, he paused, scanning again. The guard near the shed had turned away to light another cigarette, his face dimly visible in the flare of his lighter. Mid-40s, heavy-set, with a wool hat and layers of flannel that couldn't hide the sloppiness of greed. Jack moved swiftly, hand gloved in black leather, cutting the fence with silent precision. The metal wires parted with a muted twang lost beneath the wind. Inside, the compound smelled of oil, blood, and fear. Cages lined the open yard, some covered, others bare, each holding fragments of life. A young fox lay trembling in the corner of one cage, fur patchy from stress. Two wolves paced behind another fence, their yellow eyes tracking movement. Jack clenched his jaw. He'd seen cruelty before, but it never failed to twist something in him. Rex's low growl echoed the same emotion. They slipped between the cages, keeping to the shadows until they reached the generator shed. Jack crouched behind it, motioning for Rex to stay. The dog froze, perfectly still. Jack crept around the corner, found the fuel valve, and twisted it shut. The hum of the generator faltered, then died. Instantly, the yard plunged into near darkness, lit only by weak lanterns swaying in the wind. That was when he heard it. A faint whimper, human, muffled. He froze, head turning. The sound came from the small wooden shack near the ravine, the same one Rex had fixated on earlier. Jack's pulse quickened. He turned to the dog. "You smell her, don't you?" he whispered. Rex's ears pricked, tail stiffening. There was no doubt in the dog's eyes. Jack nodded once. "Let's move." They crossed the open yard swiftly, staying low. But then, Rex stopped. His body went rigid, and a split second later, the sharp crunch of boots in snow reached Jack's ears. The missing guard had returned, flashlight sweeping through the darkness. The beams slid dangerously close to their position. Jack flattened himself against a crate, hand on his knife. The guard, a younger man, maybe late 20s, with a gaunt face and jittery movements, paused to mutter into a radio clipped to his jacket. The kind of man who did dirty work not out of conviction but out of need. He turned, stepping closer, and that's when Rex moved. A low snarl, then a blur of motion. The shepherd lunged silently, knocking the man off balance, teeth clamping on his forearm before he could scream. Jack was on him in an instant, one hand over the guard's mouth, dragging him behind the crates. A quick strike to the temple, and the man slumped unconscious. Jack exhaled sharply, whispering, "Good boy," as Rex released his grip. They reached the shack moments later. The door was locked with a steel latch, but the wood around it was soft with age. Jack wedged his knife into the seam, pried once, twice, and it gave way with a dull crack. Inside, the air was warmer, heavy with the smell of damp hay and human exhaustion. A single lantern flickered in the corner, casting a thin glow over a woman slumped against the wall, wrists bound. Her hair, long and auburn, matted with dirt, fell over her face. When Jack stepped closer, she stirred weakly, lifting her head. Hazel eyes blinked open, sharp even through pain. It was Sarah Moore. Up close, she looked smaller than he remembered, thinner, her ranger's uniform torn and stained. Yet even bruised and pale, there was a strength in her expression that reminded him why he had remembered her name. Her features, high cheekbones, narrow jaw, and that steady gaze, still held defiance. She tried to speak, but her lips were cracked. Jack knelt, cutting the ropes around her wrists. "Easy, I'm Jack Turner," he said quietly. "You're safe now." Sarah's eyes flicked to Rex, then back to him. Her voice came out hoarse. "You found him," she whispered. He led you here?" Jack nodded. "Yeah, he didn't quit on you." For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips before she slumped forward. Jack lifted her carefully, one arm under her shoulders. The moment he did, Rex's ears shot up, a bark ripping from his throat, urgent, warning. A shout echoed from outside, followed by the slam of boots on snow. The guards had found the cut fence. The next moments unfolded in chaos. Jack carried Sarah out the back door just as a bullet shattered the wooden frame above his head. "Go!" he barked, and Rex sprinted ahead, leading the path toward the ravine. The wind howled, snow blinding them. Shadows moved behind, the smugglers shouting, flashlights cutting through the dark. Another shot cracked, splintering a nearby crate. Rex lunged suddenly, knocking a man off his feet just as he raised his rifle. Jack turned, striking another in the ribs with the butt of his knife. The scuffle spilled into the open yard, flashes of gunfire lighting the storm. Then, through the chaos, a new voice cut through, deeper, colder. "Drop the girl, Turner." Jack froze, eyes narrowing. Standing by the main gate was Lucas Brent, the man behind it all. He was in his 40s, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a black overcoat and leather gloves. The image of authority gone rotten. His face was all sharp lines and confidence, hair slicked back, the faint smile of a man who believed the world was his to take. Jack recognized the type instantly. He'd seen men like Brent in every war, men who built empires from others' suffering. Lucas raised his pistol, aimed steady. "You have no idea what you've stumbled into," he said evenly. "Walk away, and maybe I'll let you and the dog live." Jack's expression didn't change. "You don't negotiate with slavers," he said, voice low. Then he dropped into a crouch, rolling sideways just as Brent fired. The bullet tore through the snow inches from Sarah's leg. Rex lunged again, teeth sinking into Brent's arm, dragging him down. Jack tackled him hard, wrenching the weapon away. The fight was brutal, fast, ending with Brent pinned against the frozen ground, Jack's knife at his throat. "You'll answer for every cage here," Jack hissed. By the time sirens echoed faintly from the valley, local deputies responding to the alarm. The compound was in ruins. The gates hung open, the animals freed, and Rex stood beside Jack, panting hard, fur matted with snow and streaks of blood, but his eyes bright and alive. Sarah, wrapped in Jack's coat, leaned against the shack doorway, watching the headlights approach. "You came back for us," she murmured. Jack looked at her, then at Rex, whose tail flicked once. "He did," Jack said quietly. "I just followed." As the first lights of law enforcement vehicles cut through the snowstorm, the night over Silver Creek began to ease. The cages were empty now, their doors swinging open in the wind, a promise that, at least for tonight, the wild had won. The first light of dawn crept across the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, staining the snow in shades of rose and gold. The storm had finally passed, leaving the air sharp and still, the kind of stillness that only follows violence. Below, the compound, once masquerading as a wildlife research center, was now a ruin of broken cages, burned lanterns, and muddy tire tracks. The echo of sirens had faded, replaced by the rhythmic thump of helicopter blades circling above. Deputies in heavy parkas moved among the wreckage, collecting weapons and escorting prisoners toward armored trucks. The empire of Lucas Brent, the man who had built profit from suffering, was finished. Jack Turner stood near the main gate, his coat torn and his hands bruised, watching silently as officers led Brent away in handcuffs. The criminal's once pristine black coat was now streaked with blood and dirt, his slicked-back hair disheveled. Even then, he carried himself with the hollow arrogance of a man who still thought he could talk his way out of damnation. Jack didn't speak to him. There was nothing left to say. He had seen too many men like Brent, people who mistook cruelty for power, control for purpose. Sarah Moore, her left arm in a clean white bandage, stood a few steps away, speaking to a young deputy. Her face, pale from exhaustion, still held the quiet determination of a woman who refused to break. In daylight, she looked even younger than Jack remembered. Her auburn hair brushed free of dirt and braided loosely over one shoulder. The freckles on her fair skin caught the early sun, and though her lips were cracked, she smiled faintly as she watched the rescued animals being loaded into covered transport cages. The deputy beside her, a tall, sandy-haired man named Officer Dale Carson, was new to the force, his uniform crisp, his demeanor earnest but nervous. His face was youthful, with soft features not yet hardened by the job. He listened intently to Sarah's every instruction, clearly respecting her authority. "Get the foxes and cubs to the State Rescue Center before noon," she told him. "They won't survive another night in this cold." Carson nodded quickly, almost too eager to please. "Yes, ma'am. I'll make sure they get there safely." Rex sat near Jack's boots, tail resting in the snow, amber eyes tracking every movement in the yard. The shepherd looked tired but unbowed, the small cut on his leg bandaged neatly by a field medic. His fur glistened faintly under the sunlight, each breath forming a puff of vapor that rose like smoke. Every so often, he looked up at Jack as if to check that the man was still there. Jack reached down and ran a hand along the dog's head, fingers brushing the faint scar above his brow. "You did good, soldier," he murmured. Rex gave a short, soft bark, the sound of recognition. Sarah approached, her steps careful on the icy ground. She stopped beside them, the corner of her mouth lifting in quiet gratitude. "You could have walked away," she said. "Most people would have." Jack shook his head slightly. "Not after what I saw." He paused, looking toward the horizon where the peaks glowed orange in the sunrise. He would have found me anyway. Sarah followed his gaze down to Rex, whose ears twitched at the sound of his name. She knelt beside him, wincing slightly from her injuries, and rested a hand on the dog's collar. "You found the right man, didn't you, boy?" she whispered. Then, glancing up at Jack, she added softly, "Before they caught me, I told him, 'Find someone good.' I guess he did." Jack didn't answer immediately. The words settled in the cold air, sinking deep. For a long moment, the three of them stood in silence, the only sound the wind rustling through the pines. Around them, the deputies finished loading the last cages into trucks. The mountain was waking again, birds calling faintly from treetops, the first rays of sun warming the frozen earth. Later that morning, when the site was cleared, Sarah joined Jack by the edge of the ridge overlooking the valley. From here, Silver Creek lay in the distance, a handful of rooftops glinting in the sunlight. "They'll need someone to take care of the animals once the state's done processing them," she said, her voice softer now, almost hesitant. "And there's an old ranger station near my cabin. It's been empty for years. I've been thinking, maybe it's time to rebuild it. Not for patrols, but for healing." She glanced at him. "For them, and for people who've seen too much of the world to go back." Jack said nothing for a while. His gaze lingered on the horizon, the endless sprawl of mountains, the light breaking through the peaks, like the promise of something new. He thought of the years he'd spent running from ghosts, the silence that had once been his refuge. And now, beside him, a woman who refused to give up, and a dog that had crossed miles of wilderness to find him. Maybe the universe had been trying to tell him something. He finally nodded. "You'll need help building it," he said. Sarah smiled faintly. "I was hoping you'd say that." By midday, the last of the law enforcement vehicles departed, leaving the three of them alone in the quiet aftermath. The cages were gone, the ground littered with footprints and feathers. Rex wandered to the cabin steps and lay down, head resting on his paws. Jack leaned against the wooden railing, arms folded, while Sarah stood beside him, her bandaged arm cradled gently against her chest. Above them, the sky was clear at last, the kind of blue so sharp it felt like it could cut. The mountains stretched endlessly, their ridges glowing under the new sun. Jack watched as Rex lifted his head, ears perked toward the distant cry of an eagle soaring free. For the first time in years, Jack felt something loosen inside him, the heavy weight of guilt and isolation easing into quiet peace. He glanced at Sarah, who was smiling faintly, her hair glinting copper in the light. "I guess this is where it starts," she said softly. Jack nodded. "No," he replied. "This is where it begins again." And as the sun climbed higher over the Rockies, three silhouettes stood against the gleaming snow: a soldier who had found purpose, a ranger who had found hope, and a dog who had brought them both together. For the first time in a long while, the mountains felt like home. As the last rays of dawn melt into the snow, Jack, Sarah, and Rex remind us of something timeless, that even in the coldest nights of life, light always returns. Their story isn't just about courage or survival, it's about faith, the kind that whispers in our hearts when everything else is silent. Sometimes, God doesn't send us angels with wings. He sends us a loyal dog, a stranger with a kind heart, or the strength to stand up one more time. Each act of mercy, each moment of compassion, is a small miracle. And maybe, like Jack, we all have storms we're meant to walk through. Not as punishment, but as a path toward healing. When life feels frozen, when the world seems indifferent, remember this. God's grace can move even through snow and silence. He restores, He redeems, and He reminds us that no one is ever truly lost when love still guides the way. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it. Let someone else feel that spark of hope too. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear how you see faith and redemption in your own life. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that celebrate loyalty, love, and the quiet miracles that happen every day. May God bless you, protect your home, and light your path. Just as He lit the way for Jack, Sarah, and Rex